is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Paul Barber.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Leaders from the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation call for a balanced climate strategy and greater regional coordination.
Grim discoveries. Ukraine says more than 400 bodies have been found in the recaptured city of Izium following months of occupation by Russian troops.
Eurozone inflation rises further amid warnings it's headed for double digits.
And the most complex security operation London has ever seen. Police and army units begin mobilising ahead of the Queen's funeral on Monday.
Boosting trade, stabilising supply chains and combating climate change were among the priorities in a declaration signed by members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation that has just concluded a major summit in Samarkand in Uzbekistan.
The SCO spans South and Central Asia. China, Russia and India are among the group's 8 members, and their presidents attended the first in-person meeting of the bloc's leaders since the COVID pandemic.
Let's talk now to our correspondent Alyosha Milenkovic, who's in Samarkand. So, Alyosha, there have been several bilateral meetings between President Xi and leaders from other member states.
Absolutely correct, Robin. There were several meetings between him and, for instance, Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shahbaz Sharif. During that bilateral meeting, President Xi Jinping reiterated its support for Pakistan in its fight against the crisis which actually hit the country after the devastating floods, and of course the willingness between both sides to continue constructing and building the corridor between Pakistan and Pakistan and China. And of course there was some other meetings, including meeting between the President Xi Jinping and President of Iran, Mr. Raisi, and also President Xi Jinping met the president. I need to consult my notes because there was such a busy day today. And of course he also met the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Of course, in all those meetings, it was the most important thing is that those presidents had opportunity to meet for the first time in person after 2.5, maybe 3 years. Because of the COVID pandemic, everything was slowed down. Their communication was lowered to the online options through the cameras and TV screens. That's why these meetings were so important, and that's why at this year's SCO summit there was so many bilateral meetings. It was not just today; it was yesterday. Yesterday was the day for bilateral meetings where so many new agreements were reached, new discussions were open, new topics were open between so many leaders who arrived here. Some arrived today, some arrived yesterday, and some arrived 2 days ago. So the SCO wasn't just about the plenary session, wasn't just about the putting all of them around the round table and giving a brief speech of 4 or 5 minutes long speeches, but it was a lot about those bilateral meetings and striking variety of deals in those or during those bilateral meetings.
And at the summit, a joint declaration has been signed by SCO members. What can you tell us about that?
It is Samarkand Declaration. That's how they named it. It was a declaration which was announced a little bit earlier, a couple of days ago. So nothing has been changed in that declaration. That declaration is focused on directions or outlined directions in which the SCO countries will continue to move, both in their joint ways or in their separate ways. They all of them actually agreed to fight or to combat to fight this climate change, which affected some of these members severely. I already mentioned Pakistan. And just to mention that at the plenary session today, Pakistan Prime Minister had a very emotional speech explaining what happened to his country and how some of the SCO members were very quick to provide assistance and support. And he also said that there is only 1% of global CO2 emission that Pakistan contributes, and yet Pakistan was so severely hit with this climate change event. And he said today is Pakistan, tomorrow it will be some other country. That's why we need to work all together to combat that. That's why in this final Samarkand declaration, this point of fighting global climate change is something that is reiterated as a #1 priority for all the SCO members. And of course, opening more transportation corridors, more transportation routes, that was something also mentioned in the SCO declaration. And of course, welcoming new members and opening doors for anybody else who is interested to join the SCO. At the end, just to mention that today the Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko expressed the desire for Belarus to become full member state of the SCO, and a number of other countries became partner countries, including Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and several others.
Alyosha Milenkovic in Samarkand, thank you very much.
Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin also addressed the SCO, telling members that Moscow is willing to provide fertilizer to developing countries for free if the European Union lifts its sanctions. Stuart Smith is our correspondent in Moscow. He joins us now live. Stuart, President Putin hitting out of what he called economic selfishness of sanctions.
Yeah, that's right. He's not the first time the Russian President Vladimir Putin has criticised economic sanctions imposed by the West for the so-called special military operation in Ukraine. He continued along that line earlier, saying he wants the EU in particular to stop using the tools of protectionism, he said, illegal sanctions and economic selfishness for their own purposes. There was a big emphasis, as there has been this week in general from Russia, on the difficulties it says it's having exporting fertilizers, despite a deal Russia signed with Turkey and the United Nations months ago, which should have allowed exports of fertilizer from Russia to be made far more smoothly. And actually, just speaking right now, Vladimir Putin in his last press conference at the SCO suggested that this problem is not resolved, although he does believe it's a mistake in the way that EU sanctions have been drafted. His claim is that the fertilizer exports from Russia cannot go to third countries because of EU sanctions, which the European Union Commission says doesn't make sense. Its sanctions only apply to countries within the European Union, and it does nothing to prevent exports of fertilizer from Russia to third countries. There's clearly not something matching here with the rhetoric from both parties, but one interesting intervention from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky today, who suggested that on this particular pipeline, which previously exported ammonia from Russia through Ukraine to the Black Sea ports and then on to the rest of the world, something the United Nations is trying to get running again because it's integral for the world supply of fertilizer. Volodymyr Zelensky says he'll only open that pipeline if Russia engages in more exchanges of prisoners of war. So indeed, this issue with ammonia taking on many different dimensions.
And President Putin also voicing his approval for the inclusion of Iran in the SCO.
That's right. This has been years in the making. This doesn't just happen with 1 year and then one summit. This is something that's been planned by foreign ministers over many SCO meetings and indeed is now closer than ever to going ahead. For Russia, it's a big, very positive development because Russia always has had good relations with Iran, but particularly now is very important because Iran is going to be one of the fundamental economies to Russia's pivot to the East and Asia, and including, of course, Iran in the Middle East as it tries to move away from Western import routes. Iran's promised all sorts of help, including $3 billion worth of construction materials that previously would have been delivered through different routes. It means that the SCO now has countries totaling 25% of the world's oil production, important for Russia, of course, and Iran. And indeed, the Russian president said it will have a positive impact not just on the work of the organization, but also for the world, as Iran is such an important player.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, many thanks.
Ukraine says more than 400 bodies have been found in a mass grave in Izium after the city was liberated from Russian control.
If the numbers are verified, it would be the biggest mass grave discovered in Europe since the Balkans War in the 1990s. President Zelensky has accused Russia of leaving death behind it everywhere and says it must be held responsible.
Moscow hasn't officially commented on the claims, but has said previously that its troops do not carry out atrocities. Well, our correspondent Julia Chapman is in Kyiv. So, Julia, what more can you tell us about this?
Investigators are now exhuming the bodies that they have found in this large mass grave outside of Izium in the forest, with wooden crosses interspersed between the trees, some graves with names, others just with numbers. They are trying to determine exactly how many bodies are buried there, who these people were, and how they died. This is painstaking work that will take some time, but undoubtedly very urgent, as well as authorities try to get to grips with what happened in Izium and perhaps in other places in the Kharkiv area, newly retaken territory. We understand that some of the people are thought to have died in shelling, others perhaps from a lack of access to health care. But the governor of the Kharkiv region, in which Izium is situated, says that some of the bodies had their hands tied, suggesting that they had been deliberately killed. Most of these people are thought to have been civilians, but at least one grave is understood to have contained a number of Ukrainian soldiers, all buried one on top of each other. International investigators are getting involved as well in an effort to find out how these people died and indeed who was responsible for this. Of course, many Russian soldiers now in Ukrainian captivity, having been captured in the counteroffensive in recent days.
And Julia, Russian-backed separatists have blamed Kyiv for the killing of officials in occupied areas.
That's right. There have been a series of reports today from Russian official telegram channels of those Russian-installed authorities in various different parts of Ukraine, some in the south, some in the east. Earlier today in Kherson, the city in the Kherson region in the south, the administrative building was attacked. There was video circulating on Russian state media of a plume of smoke emerging from that building. And it's understood that one city administrator installed by Russia since forces took over there earlier this year was killed in that attack. Then in Luhansk, the prosecutor of the so-called Luhansk People's Republic was reportedly killed alongside his deputy in an explosion in their office today. And also in the south, in Berdyansk, in Zaporizhia region, another Russian-installed official and his wife were reportedly killed in their garage in unclear circumstances. There has also been another explosion in Melitopol in the south as well. Unclear if there were any casualties from that, but Russian officials have been accusing Ukraine of carrying out these attacks. Ukraine so far has denied responsibility for any of them.
And on the diplomatic front, the United Nations is considering a proposal to allow President Zelensky to address world leaders at its annual gathering next week.
That's right. The United Nations is expected to discuss that today. Volodymyr Zelensky is saying that he will not be able to travel to the UN General Assembly in person due to what he says is Russia's ongoing aggression against Ukraine. And so his administration has asked that he can address the UN by video call, by a pre-recorded video, much like world leaders have done over the last couple of years due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But Russia not very happy about that suggestion. The Russian ambassador to the United Nations says that if Volodymyr Zelensky can't travel himself, then he should send a representative in his stead. There will likely be a vote put forward by Russia on that today, and we'll likely learn the outcome of that and whether Volodymyr Zelensky will be allowed to address the UN next week.
Julia, thank you very much. Our correspondent Julia Chapman in Kyiv.
German subsidiaries of the Russian oil giant Rosneft have been put under state control as Germany tries to shore up energy supplies. The three refineries include a facility which supplies around 90% of Berlin's fuel. Germany is aiming to meet an EU commitment to eliminate Russian oil imports by the end of the year.
The British pound is continuing to hit lows against the US dollar, not seen since the mid-1980s, fueled by disappointing sales figures for August. Sterling is also falling against the euro on a day that marks the 30th anniversary of so-called Black Wednesday. The pound crashed in September 1992, forcing it out of the European exchange rate mechanism and leading to a major loss of confidence in the then Conservative government.
Stay with us on CGTN. Coming up, dangerously close to double digits. Can Brussels slow the pace of record Eurozone inflation?
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and the bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Soaring energy prices, surging inflation, strained supply chains. As costs spiral and goods run short, people are feeling the heat. Join us for a special new series, Crunch Time, starting August the 1st, here on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Eurozone inflation has risen to 9.1% in August, up from 8.9% the previous month.
That's more than treble the rate seen this time last year. The biggest contributing factor is the soaring cost of energy. Well, Melanie De Bono is Senior Europe Economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics and joins us now. Thank you very much indeed. So what are the chances of Europe's current inflation levels actually hitting double figures?
Well, at this point, the good news in the data earlier today was that the energy rate already started dipping in August, and we think this will continue. The bad news is that the core rate increase probably has further to run, especially given the reversal of one-off factors that have depressed the rate since June in Germany. However, although we see an increase in the inflation rate in the headline, at the moment, our model doesn't point to double-digit rates, but of course, we can never rule it out.
And which policies do you anticipate being put forward by the bloc as the winter closes in, energy bills continue to rise? Could we be looking at things like rationing?
Definitely. So the government's main issues at the moment in the Eurozone is trying to control the cost of living. We've already seen some measures being pushed forward. So, for example, France has had an energy price cap for a while now, and Germany has offered loans to struggling firms. But more will have to be done. The European Commission, for its part, came out earlier this week proposing a windfall tax on energy companies that don't use gas to produce electricity but are still benefiting because of the way that the single market is formed. But again, it's unclear how these taxes will be collected and to whom the money will be dispersed. As we head into the winter months, we think it will get more and more difficult for gas energy supplies. So we expect Eurozone countries to have to push through with rationing, even though they've more or less reached their targets on gas storage levels, especially because Russian flows at this point have more or less dissipated to zero.
So the European Central Bank, whose headline inflation target is 2%, raised its key interest rates by an unprecedented 75 basis points last week, prioritising the fight against inflation. When could we see those further hikes, and what effects might that have?
So going forward, we expect the European Central Bank, which has come out recently and said, they will prioritize inflation over growth, basically because growth is fast slowing now. So we expect it to go again with another 75 basis point hike come October. And that will mean that the deposit rate, the main threshold rate that is tracked for the ECB, will have gone from minus 0.5% to 1.5% in just 4 months. And given where we think inflation is going to be in December at its then last meeting of the year, we think it will not take its foot off the hiking pedal and expect another 50 basis points, taking the deposit rate to 2% by the end of this year.
And is a deep recession inevitable, or could there be some chance of a soft landing?
Well, we think a recession in the Eurozone is the most likely scenario at this point. So real wages are falling as inflation has surged and wage growth has not been able to keep up. And consumer confidence has tanked since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So we expect household spending to fall in Q3 and Q4. And we doubt that the fiscal measures that will be pushed through and that we expect to be pushed through will be enough to limit that. What's more, industry will be hit hard by energy rationing because it will probably be first asked to close in order to preserve energy so that consumers can actually heat their homes over the winter. And that's also not assuming a colder winter than usual.
Melanie De Bono, Senior Europe Economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics. Many thanks indeed for that analysis.
Parcel delivery giant FedEx has seen its shares plunge after issuing a profit warning on the back of disappointing quarterly results. And it's not the only big company struggling. Let's talk to John Terrett in New York. So, John, worrying signs then?
Well, that's the point, Robin and Paul. They are worrying signs. And the reason they're particularly being paid attention to today is because it's FedEx. Now, FedEx is a global logistics company. You see them operating all over the world. By the way, look for the secret little white arrow in their logo. Next time you see a FedEx logo, there's a little secret white arrow that nobody notices pointing forward, indicating that they are just moving forward with their business, except that they're not anymore because they are saying that they are withdrawing their earnings forecast. Now, when companies give us their earnings, they always say, well, this is how much we're going to make by the end of the year, and this is how much we're going to make by a year from now. And FedEx is withdrawing that completely, which is pretty worrying, really, given the size of the company. Remember, there are other logistics companies on the same scale. They would be UPS and DHL, for example, and there are others too. But FedEx is one of the more noticeable ones, and they say that there are signs of weakness in their businesses already in Asia and particularly in Europe, which kind of plays into the interview that Paul was doing just now on the program. So that's one thing. But then General Electric, which is one of the founders of the Dow Jones. It's not on the Dow anymore, but it was 120 odd years ago. And they are saying, General Electric is saying, that they've got real supply chain issue worries and that this is affecting their cash flow. Their cash flow is being squeezed. Now, GE is in the process of trimming itself down to 3 divisions. That will be health and aviation and energy. And it is thought that this supply chain issue that they're talking about particularly applies to the manufacturing and the delivery of jet engines into 2023. So anyway, as you rightly say, Robin, the FedEx share price is leading things down here today. FedEx down 23%, UPS 5%, DHL 6%, and General Electric down by 5%. And the markets are down again on this Friday, 1% over at the Dow, 1.5% NASDAQ, S&P down 1.2%. This is the worst it's been since July 2020, and they're looking ahead now to the Federal Reserve decision on interest rates on Wednesday, and indeed, I suspect, beyond that now, probably looking to November. Guys?
Well, John, let's talk about another company that's known for moving things. Uber has apparently been hacked by a teenager.
I know. This is a great story. If it's true, I would caution you, by the way, these things have a habit of changing. OK, so it might be a different story come Monday from what it is today. But at the moment, these are the details that we have. And I'm glad you said that Uber is known for moving things, because you're absolutely right about that, Robin. When you think about Uber, you think taxi, don't you? That's what you think. Wrong. It's not. It's a technology company, and a very, very complicated one and sophisticated one at that. The trouble is, although they've burnt billions of dollars setting themselves up, and I don't think they still quite make a profit, not really, they apparently have not done enough for cybersecurity, because if this is true, an 18-year-old has hacked into their internal systems. He's angry that Uber drivers aren't paid very much. He knew that the security system was weak, so he had a go. He went on to the internal staff Slack messaging system and said, I announce I'm a hacker and Uber has suffered a data breach. But here's the thing, the staff thought it was a joke. So they started Slack messaging back, oh, good for you, well done, fantastic, here's an emoji and all that kind of stuff. Well, it turns out to be true, and they knew that when he sent them all an explicit photograph, which wasn't really very clever. Anyway, the reports are that this is a total compromise of Uber's entire internal system. So its Slack system, other internal communications, its engineering system. And it was down for a while. Uber apps for the cars are working in New York at the moment, I just checked, but the share price is down about 5%, and Uber hasn't really commented except in a tweet in which say they're investigating this and they will report it to the authorities if needs be. Just finally, Uber was hacked in 2016. Someone got away with 57 million account details. But this seems as if it was a bit of a prank.
John,
Guys.
thank you so much for that. That's our correspondent, John Terrett in New York.
China has released August economic data, with officials saying the numbers show that the world's second largest economy has withstood the impact of multiple factors. Our correspondent Dai Kai-yi reports.
The latest figures released by China's National Bureau of Statistics show a resilient economy that continues to recover. The industrial output and retail sales grew 4.2% and 5.4% in August from a year ago. Fixed asset investment for the first 8 months of this year beat expectations, rising by 5.8%. Imports and exports of goods also grew in August, with their total value rising by 8.6% year-on-year.
The national economy withstood the impacts of multiple unexpected factors and sustained the momentum of recovery and growth, with major indicators showing positive changes. However, we should be aware that the international environment is still complicated and severe, and the foundation of domestic economic recovery is not solid.
The spokesperson says high inflation in major developed economies has resulted in tight monetary policies in Europe and the US, rendering the downward pressure on the world economy. Major international organizations have lowered their forecasts for global economic growth for several times this year. The Bureau spokesperson says reduced external demand, COVID outbreaks, and extreme weather have made it difficult for China's economy to maintain its recovery momentum. But the latest figures show the country's economic resilience and potential. Dai Kai-yi, CGTN, Beijing.
Still to come on Global Business Europe. The growing divide between Brussels and Budapest. Hungary could lose EU funding amid a row over democratic principles.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
This week on Razor, we look at the astronomical amount of plastic waste we produce every year and the steps being taken to reverse this trend.
We need to have a harmonized quality assurance stage to make sure that the plastic that is created by the reprocessing facilities is of good quality so that it can be used in the new bottles.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and Paul Barber. The headlines again. Leaders from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization call for a balanced climate strategy and greater regional coordination.
Grim discoveries. Ukraine says more than 400 bodies have been found in the recaptured city of Izium after months of occupation by Russian troops.
And Eurozone inflation rises further amid warnings it's headed for double digits.
Hungary's Prime Minister has hit out at EU criticism that his country can no longer be considered a democracy. The bloc is due to decide next week whether Viktor Orban's government will be denied EU funding.
Brussels is concerned at what it says is a rollback of democratic norms in the country, including judicial and media independence and LGBTQ rights. But another key accusation is that Budapest has not done enough to tackle corruption. Our correspondent, Pablo Gutierrez, reports.
Prime Minister Viktor Orban lashed out today in Serbia over a European Parliament declaration that stated Hungary could no longer be considered a democracy.
We don't laugh at it because we are bored. It's a boring joke. It's the third or fourth time they're doing it to accept a resolution condemning Hungary in the European Parliament.
EU lawmakers have called on Orban's government to step up anti-corruption safeguards before unblocking Hungary's share of the EU's COVID recovery fund, equivalent to $7.2 billion in grants. Hungary's prime minister said today that he doesn't care if the EU cuts the funds.
But economists say that losing out on billions of dollars on EU funding will come exactly at the wrong time for the Hungarian economy.
If the money is not coming and the business mood deteriorates, then unfortunately the good years will be over and we face a tough economic cycle.
Ahead of Brussels' decision, Hungary announced that it would create an anti-corruption authority and a working group involving non-government organizations to oversee the spending of European Union funds. Still, some economists believe that Hungary's efforts will not be enough to satisfy Brussels' requirements.
Worst-case scenario could be that Hungary and the EU bodies won't be able to settle the deal in this rule of law procedure, and that would mean we're going into the sanction phase, whereas the European Union will decide about a fair amount of sanction. Because it is quite important to know that within this new rule of law mechanism, any type of we can say punishment. So any type of punishment must to be proportionate. Now, it depends on the European Commission, European Council, what means proportional. But altogether, I guess it means that Hungary won't lose the full amount of EU funds.
If Hungary loses out of the recovery funds or is frozen out of the EU budget, that would be the first time Brussels punishes a country under its new financial sanction dubbed Cash for Democracy, which was agreed 2 years ago precisely in response to Orban. Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN, Budapest.
At least 1,000 flights have been cancelled in France as air traffic controllers go on strike.
Yes, they're calling for better pay and changes to the way that new staff are recruited. Our correspondent Ross Cullen reports.
It's a move that upended travel plans for thousands of people as regional airports closed and a skeleton service was in operation at the bigger hubs. The National Union of Air Traffic Controllers said workers were demanding salary increases due to the worsening cost of living crisis. The union has concerns about inflation undermining wages and also what it sees as a lack of sufficient planning for future recruitment into this critical role. At the country's main hub, Charles de Gaulle Airport just outside Paris, the departure boards showed lines of red as planes remained grounded. In anticipation of the strike, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation had asked airlines to cancel half their flights departing from or arriving into France. The head of the Union of French Airports said the industrial action was regrettable and unfortunate. There's also been an impact on planes flying over France en route to other destinations, with around 21,000 planes expected to pass through European airspace on Friday. That's down by around 1/3 on normal numbers. Ryanair has had to cancel 420 flights, either overflying or landing in France, and the national carrier Air France dropped around half of its 800 planned services on Friday. Strikes across the aviation industry had caused severe disruption to European summer holidays, with French airports hit by walkouts in July by airport firefighters. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
The Belgian government is set to announce measures to help people deal with soaring energy costs.
They include a price cap on gas and a furlough scheme for energy-intensive firms that scale back their power use. Our correspondent Alex Cadier is in Brussels for us. Tell us more about these new government measures, Alex.
Yeah, it'll be a big, huge sigh of relief for a lot of households here in Belgium. In the last few hours, the federal government has agreed measures to help them get through the cost of living crisis and soaring energy bills. Direct financial support from the federal government. They will help people pay their bills directly in November, in December. So that's €135 will be given to Belgian citizens to help with their gas bill, and €61 to help towards their electricity bill. Now, that's significantly more than what we heard those numbers might be earlier in the week, closer to €50 and €10. It's a much higher level of support by the federal government. It's also a little bit different to what we thought. It's going to be targeted. So the measure will be targeted to those who need it most, and we're expecting that the wealthiest 20% here in Belgium will be expected to pay that back through their taxation. The country's economy minister saying this morning it would be incomprehensible for wealthy Belgians like ministers and a lot of people who work in that building and the European Commission behind me, to get assistance for energy bills that they don't particularly need, energy bills that they can afford. So at the very least, this measure will give households a lot of support. Some people also excluded. People on fixed rate energy contracts will not be getting this assistance, and people who are already receiving social support and social rates for their energy bills will also be excluded. But definitely a big direct support from the Belgian government to its citizens to get through the energy crisis.
And are these actions linked to recent EU announcements about the energy crisis?
Yes, in a word. €1.5 billion the cost of these measures. So there's the direct financial support, as I said, but also a furlough scheme. So energy-hungry companies that want to save energy can stop production, and the government will pay for 70% of their workers' wages. So a very similar scheme to what we saw. Now, these are quite expensive measures, as you'd imagine. €1.5 billion is a big chunk of cash for the Belgian government to find, and that will be funded through the European Union's solidarity contribution, as they call it. You and I would probably call it a windfall tax on the profits of fossil fuel providers. That, to remind you, 33% tax will be rolled out across the European Union on excess profits, so profits made in the fiscal year of 2022. Now, that money will be directed straight to member states in the hope that they use that cash to then support people get through the cost of living crisis. So this is exactly what's happening here. The Belgian government using that money to directly support Belgian citizens. But there's also the aspect of energy saving. European member states will be expected to have a 5% reduction in their energy usage at peak times, and so they're going to have to find ways to reduce that energy consumption as well. One example, for example, Belgium's motorway system, well known to be lit up at night in its entirety, will be switched off. It used to be visible from space. It won't be now because we're trying to save energy here in Belgium. So that's one example of how energy-saving measures will come through. But definitely that European Union support and structure being used to support Belgium's government in supporting Belgian citizens. So a huge sigh of relief for a lot of people here in Brussels.
OK, Alex, thanks for that. Alex Cadier in Brussels.
In Spain, many people are finding the cost of living crisis is really hitting home. With inflation running at over 10% and wages failing to increase, the country is suffering more than its European neighbours. Our correspondent Rahul Pathak reports.
This food bank in the Madrid neighbourhood of Aluche helped hundreds of families during the height of the COVID pandemic. But this community, like many across the country, is facing another crisis and the queues are getting longer.
The price of energy, fuel and commodities like food have increased hugely. Many families are struggling. Even those who have jobs can't afford the increases that we're currently seeing. Right now, many families face an extremely difficult situation.
Eurostat data shows Spain has suffered some of the highest rates of inflation in Europe. Year-on-year consumer price inflation has seen double-digit rises in fuel, basic groceries and rent. The situation is compounded because average wages in Spain are amongst the lowest in Western Europe. Now, the hunger queues have returned just as the European Central Bank has raised interest rates across the Eurozone, with the biggest hike seen in over a decade to combat the rate of inflation. And with household budgets now being stretched to the absolute limit for the people here, it's now become a case of how they're going to survive from day to day.
This winter, I will not be able to heat my house because with gas prices, it's now impossible. It's impossible. You can only use gas to heat the water and nothing more, just to shower and clean the pans, nothing else.
The government has tried to reduce the financial burden on the population. They have organised subsidies on fuel, increased pensions and issued a windfall tax on banks and energy corporations that was used to pay for free rail travel. The government has even asked supermarket chains to help by freezing prices on basic food staples. Critics have said this latest move amounts to price regulation. Inflation looks set to remain high throughout the winter and beyond. For the residents of Aluche, this latest crisis will push an already vulnerable community to the limit. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Well, as we heard at the top of the show, members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which includes China, India and Pakistan and Russia, have called for greater coordination to face regional challenges.
The current challenge, of course, is Pakistan's deadly flooding. CGTN's Daniel Khan looks at how China has been helping.
More than one-third of Pakistan is underwater as deadly flood waters threaten to create secondary disasters. Aid agencies have warned of an uptick in infectious diseases, leaving millions vulnerable to illness caused by the floods.
According to the United Nations, over 21 million acres of crops were underwater, and an estimated 65% of the country's food basket, crops like rice and wheat, have been destroyed, with nearly 1 million livestock killed. International agencies have warned of an acute food crisis expected to hit Pakistan in the wake of the catastrophic floods.
But when the floods hit Pakistan, China responded immediately and made every effort to provide relief assistance.
I think, as expected, as always, China has been helping Pakistan in difficult times. And this time around, too, there's a help to the tune of 400 million RMB, and a couple of military flights also landed in Pakistan carrying relief goods for the affected areas. And I think Chinese government is on board for all the relief efforts that Pakistan is carrying out in various flood-affected areas across Pakistan.
According to Pakistan's National Disaster Management Authority, Pakistan has been thrown into the front line of the human-induced climate crisis. Experts believe the SCO meeting will be an opportunity for Pakistan to discuss future strategy with member countries on how to deal with climate change.
I think SEO summit is going to foresee the regional situation. It will be addressing some of the issues that region is facing at the moment. And of course, having all the countries together, important countries together, those are members of SEO, it's going to be a message also to the world that look, in trying times of difficulties, in times of conflicts, there's still possibility of having all these regional countries together.
According to Pakistan's Foreign Office, the SCO leaders will focus on regional issues including climate change, energy security and sustainable supply chains. For Pakistan, regional cooperation is of great importance as the country faces a threat of food insecurity in the days ahead. Danial Khan, CGTN, Islamabad.
At least 10 people have been killed and several remain missing after floodwater inundated towns in central Italy. Firefighters tried to rescue people from cars and rooftops following hours of heavy rainfall. 2 children are among the missing. Around 50 people were treated for injuries, with the mayor of one town on the Adriatic coast describing the sudden floodwaters as like a tsunami.
A huge fire that engulfed a skyscraper in the Chinese city of Changsha is now said to be out. Authorities say so far they've not found any casualties in the 42-floor office building. It's reported to be a communications tower housing offices for China Telecom, one of the country's main mobile carriers. Eyewitnesses reported seeing people fleeing the building as the fire broke out.
2 police officers have been stabbed in central London and are being treated in hospital. The attack happened in the city's West End Theatre district early on Friday. A man has been arrested. Police say the attack was not terror-related.
Some of the people queuing for hours in London to file past the coffin of Queen Elizabeth were cheered to see former football star David Beckham alongside them. He took photos with fans after having reportedly joined the queue in the early hours of the morning. Last week, Beckham wrote on social media that he was truly saddened by her death.
And still ahead here, London's biggest ever security operation. We take a look at the plans to keep heads of state safe during Queen Elizabeth's funeral.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
And welcome back. Britain's new king has visited Wales for the first time since becoming monarch.
King Charles III, accompanied by his wife, the Queen Consort, told the Welsh Parliament that the country had held a special place in his mother's heart. The visit's part of a tour of the United Kingdom in the wake of the death of Queen Elizabeth II last week.
Well, the Queen's state funeral will involve London's biggest ever security operation for a single event.
With huge crowds travelling to the city, plus the arrival of dozens of world leaders, policing the capital throughout Sunday and Monday will be a huge challenge. Well, Ken Griffiths is a counter-terrorism and security expert, and he joins us now. Welcome to the programme, Ken. So this will obviously be a huge event in terms of security. London police saying the biggest they've ever dealt with. What will the biggest challenges be, do you think?
Well, the simple one, of course, is keeping everybody safe and sound. The amount of crowds that you've got in the areas at the time, that's a big issue, obviously. And then you've got the issues of looking after the royal family and also the dignitaries which are coming from...
Well, Ken, we have a few sound problems, but we're going to try and carry on if we can. Obviously, another big issue is a lot of heads of state, world leaders, coming to this funeral. That must add to the security concerns.
Yes, absolutely. Bear in mind, though, Robin, that over the years, this has been practiced time and time again. So it isn't as though they're doing it without any knowledge of what they should be doing in the future. And clearly what they've done over the years, they've had reruns of these kind of events to try and work out all of the snags that they need to get through to allow these dignitaries to come to the UK and be safe while they're here.
So how do you police something like this? What will it actually involve? We've heard about security on rooftops and even in manholes. How do you police it? What's put in place?
Right, OK. Well, you start off with intelligence first and foremost, which has been gathered over a number of years. Bear in mind, the UK is probably one of the best countries in the world to hold this kind of an event, simply because we've had plenty of practice in the past. Not as big as this one. I think the last one this big was Winston Churchill's funeral back in the 60s. That was a big affair as well. So we've got that in place. So we've got intelligence behind this which leads the policing and leads the security services as to where they should be placed, what the manpower should be. They brought in over 1,000 officers from different areas, certainly from where I live in the middle of the UK. 1,000 officers have gone from here down to the metropolitan area. So all of that's gone on, and so the policing of that is the first thing. The second thing, of course, is to make sure that if there's any known threats at the time, terrorists are in the country that are being looked at, then all of those are being monitored minute by minute.
And the state funeral happening on Monday, of course, and it comes after days of a long policing operation already, including policing the queue. How will that add to the pressure?
Well, it's all pressure from the very start. And as I say, it isn't as though we haven't planned this. That queue that you're talking about, that queue has been thought about years ago, absolutely years ago, that they thought if this, in the event of this happening, the Queen's death and then the funeral of the Queen, how will we police it? One of the things they said was, well, you know, she will lie in state, and how will we get around that? How will we manage the crowds? And so they put in that plan many, many years ago, and they've tried and tested this time and time again. So it isn't as though they're, you know, stabbing in the dark. What they're doing is they're reacting to situations that they knew one day they would have to react to. So that does help.
OK, Ken Griffiths, thank you very much indeed for joining us today and sharing your thoughts.
And the royal succession is the subject of this weekend's agenda here on CGTN, as Juliette Mann considers the future of Britain's role on the world stage under a new monarch.
Richard Drayton, who's a professor of imperial and global history at King's College London, explains why the death of Queen Elizabeth II comes at a difficult time for the UK.
The Kingdom at the moment is in the midst of a number of overlapping crises, economic, which are connected to social, but also possibly political crises. I think there is a kind of, something of a kind of breakdown of real public confidence in any of the political parties. The monarchy played a great stabilizing role in Britain particularly over the last few years, through the crises of Brexit, the pandemic, the Ukraine war, and the various kinds of to's and fro's of party politics. Including the various affairs surrounding the resignation of Boris Johnson. So the loss of the monarchy means removing a still point at the centre of national life. And it's quite unclear exactly what the implications will be at this point. But it is a pivotal moment.
And you can see more of that interview on the agenda with Juliette Mann this weekend here on CGTN.
Now, the Motor City is roaring back. The US city of Detroit will host thousands of car fans this weekend as the North American International Auto Show opens to the public for the first time since before the pandemic.
Despite a big push towards electric, most of the new launches remain petrol-powered, as Dan Williams reports.
Hundreds of Ford Mustangs from the past and present line the streets of Detroit. The so-called stampede began in the U.S. state of Washington and visited the Ford headquarters in Michigan before reaching its final destination at Detroit's Hart Plaza. It was all part of Ford's unveiling of the 7th generation Mustang at the North American International Auto Show. The new car won't have an electric option. This is a vehicle for those still thirsting for the roar of a V8 engine. But Ford's Jim Owens says the company is looking to cater to all markets.
We've been able to build our portfolio in the sports car segment to be able to deliver both on electric and on those customers who still desire that internal combustion engine. We've expanded the Mustang corral, if you will. If you are interested in the electrical propulsion, we have that Mustang Mach-E. We know that customers still want a choice between those.
The challenge for many auto manufacturers is balancing the move to electric vehicles while also releasing products the market demands today. And it would appear that most are likely to keep a foot in both camps, for the time being at least. To illustrate that point, Chevrolet's big reveal at this show is the gas-powered Tahoe RST. But the company recently revealed a new range of EVs, taking pride of place on their stand.
People will be buying internal combustion engines for some time. It's how fast do we stay aligned with the pace at which EV adoption is happening. But that's what Chevrolet's going to be. We're going to be here for EV customers. We're going to be here for internal combustion engine customers.
Jeep revealed 2 new hybrid cars at the show. But longer term, they see a huge market for 4x4 electric vehicles.
There is a lot of traction in North America, and when people start experiencing electrification, I think they fall in love with it. Especially when you off-road, when you're on a trail, doors are off, top off, and you're in absolute silence, in a trail. This is wonderful.
The EV market promises to be intensely competitive in the coming years, but the transition for traditional auto manufacturers poses major headwinds. Dan Williams, CGTN, Detroit.
And finally, Oktoberfest returns to Munich this weekend after a 2-year gap because of the pandemic.
The world-renowned beer festival takes place at the 42-hectare Theresienwiese festival ground and is famous for scenes like these. Lasting until October the 3rd, it attracts visitors from around the world and includes a fairground as well as traditional beer tents.
Our main stories again. Leaders from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization call for a balanced climate strategy and greater regional coordination.
Grim discoveries. Ukraine says more than 400 bodies have been found in the recaptured city of Izium following months of occupation by Russian troops.
And Eurozone inflation rises further amid warnings it's headed for double digits.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks so much for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again on Monday, same time, same place. From all the team in London, goodbye.
Bye-bye.